Welcome and thanks for joining today for our review and a taste test of the Rutgers Tomato. The Rutgers Tomato is, by my understanding, this particular version here is not an heirloom tomato, although I have read and I do think there are some heirloom variety of the Rutgers Tomato, but this one is definitely a hybrid tomato. A little bit of the background and history that I found out that this was actually a favorite back in the early half of the 20th century, back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, especially along the East Coast. Rutgers obviously got its name from originating in the state of New Jersey, Garden State. Lots of good vegetables from that state. This particular tomato here that we're going to taste test today came in at about just under 10 ounces. I'd say this is a pretty typical size of a Rutgers tomato, at least the ones that I've grown. The ones that I've grown are from American Seed Company. I will say, while this has a nice flavor that we'll get to here in a moment, this is the, I think, second season, maybe the third season that I've grown these. And although this season out west here was particularly not a good season for growing, I've never had a very productive plant, at least not until the start of September, which, even though we have a little bit of a shorter growing season here in Colorado, for me, this is definitely not meet its advertised maturity timeline. Maybe just the seeds I have, but once we've gotten into September, the plant itself has been a little bit more productive, but I found that for the last couple of years, this plant is very slow to start putting blossoms on, slow to start putting fruit on afterwards, and just seems to generally lag behind the other varieties in my garden, despite being very healthy plants, plants themselves growing just fine. The productivity of these Rutgers tomatoes plants has disappointed me the times that I've grown them. So let's go ahead and give this Rutgers tomato, let's slice it open and try to describe the flavor for you. You'll notice on this side here, got a split. I will say this particular split was from some late season September rainstorms that we got here in Colorado. Had a lot of that with a lot of my different tomato varieties. In general, I did not see that from the Rutgers tomato, but for these that are ripening after having several days of kind of cooler, extensive rain that really soaked the ground after we typically have somewhat drier summers here. So the entirety of the ground being moist like that is a little odd for the plants, and I think because of that, that's why a lot of them ended up splitting. Let's go ahead and cut this open. Very nice looking tomato on the inside. And again, for the flavor part that I'll try to describe for you here in a minute, these do not disappoint. They're a very juicy tomato, probably not one that you'd want to attempt to make sauce out of. Great for salads, great for sandwiches, great for lots of other uses, but they are definitely a juicy tomato. A fair amount of meat on the inside, but definitely not as meaty as some other varieties. But very, very nice looking tomato. And like I said, for me, nice tasting too. Just been a very late producer, which in Colorado we have short enough seasons already. Generally try to grow some of the shorter season, and while I think the maturity on these are supposed to be around 75, 80 days, definitely have taken much longer than that in every year that I've grown them. So let's give this a taste and tell you what we're tasting here with the Rutgers tomato. So good, I'm gonna have another bite. These are definitely a classic tomato flavor. This is probably why they've been very popular over the years and a very popular variety to grow. And maybe it's just an East Coast versus Intermountain West thing. Maybe these grow very well on the eastern seaboard where there's obviously more humidity, more natural rainfall, warmer evenings, etc. Just haven't been productive here, but very nice tomato, classic tomato flavor is what I'll call them, homegrown classic tomato flavor. A little bit higher on the acid than some varieties. I wouldn't call it an overly acidic tomato, but definitely not a low acid tomato. I'd say average to above average acidity, which for me is one of those things I like in a tomato and why they taste great on sandwiches, because when you're biting into that sandwich or having a fork full of salad and you have one of these on the end of it, just a burst of flavor, very flavorful tomato. Hope that helps understand a little bit more about the Rutgers tomatoes. Please, if you have any questions about this tomato that I didn't answer for you, let me know. Leave it in the comments, and I'll see you again soon.